Hello there, you crazy mixed up kid. I'm happy to see that you have gathered enough courage to venture once again into the vault. Clear away that pile of withered, maggoty bones and sit down. Did you bring your shrunken eyeball good luck charm? I want you to be well prepared for this horrifying hair raiser I'm about to tell. You'll like this one, I'm sure. So without further ado, let's begin the story called Starlight, Star Bright. Dusk had settled over the drab grounds of Deathmoor, and the misty rain fell with a diabolical perseverance, covering all with a maddening wetness. Hartley Quimb hunched his shoulders against the chill and cursed softly. He cursed the rain and the cold. He cursed the uniformed guards beside him and the minister before him, the gibbering crowd surrounding him and the gnawing fear inside of him. He even cursed the body lying in the uncovered coffin. From behind him, a figure darted to the coffin and playfully fingered the face of the corpse. No one made a move to stop him. Hartley Quimb was horrified to the point of nausea. The figure scurried back to the crowd. The minister spoke on, uninterrupted, and Hartley Quimb lowered his gaze to the quivering mud puddles. Bit of a shock, eh, Governor? Hartley Quimb turned to look at the stern-faced guard who had addressed him. Oh, Lord, yes, that was horrible. Aye, but it's important. You'll see, after you've been here a bit. Another figure crept to the coffin. He gazed curiously at the body, his eyes saddened. Then, impulsively, he slapped the corpse across the cheek. Oh, good heavens, did you see that? Aye, we let them do that. A funeral's a treat for these poor souls, and it helps us to control them. We use it as a means to enforce discipline. Hartley Quimb began to waver. He swore at himself for ever having accepted the position of master of Deathmoor Asylum. If he hadn't needed the money. Discipline? Aye, Governor. If the inmates don't behave themselves, we don't let them attend the next funeral. It's about the only way we can control them, understaffed as we are. The coffin had at last been covered, yet a few of the inmates ran forward to lift the lid slightly and peer inquisitively inside. Then the coffin was lowered into the ground. Oh, thank God, it's over. Aye, I guess you're a bit hungry, not having a bit to eat since you arrived this afternoon. Well, we'll soon fix that. The thought of food had never entered Hartley's mind, but he walked with the guards to the mess hall, which seated both inmates and custodians alike. You must understand, sir, the inmates, they're not insane. For the most part, they're merely childish. They just act and think like little kids. Well, what happened to the master who preceded me? Oh, him, poor soul. The inmates killed him when he tried to take away all their funeral privileges. Hartley Quimb nervously lifted the fork and speared a choice piece of steak. He was about to place it in his mouth when his gaze drifted out over to the table. His hand trembled. 100 glaring eyes burned into his. 100 hate-filled eyes watched his every move. Suddenly he saw the slovenly food they were eating. He glanced at the juicy, tender morsel of steak on his fork, and then looked again into their venomous eyes. The fork clattered to the table as he rose unsteadily to his feet. I'm not very hungry. If you'll excuse me, I think I'll go to my room. Well, all right, Governor. Mind if I take your steak? Hartley Quimb hurried from the mess hall as fast as his wobbling legs would carry him, and climbed the rickety stairs to his room. Once inside, he bolted the flimsy lock and leaned heavily against the door. They hate me. I could tell they want to kill me too. They hate me. He threw himself onto the bed, gazed tiredly through the skylight at the sky. The rain had stopped, and he dozed. Suddenly he was awakened by the grasping of many hands. He felt a cloth being roughly shoved into his mouth. His eyes bugged open, and beheld a sight that froze his heartbeat. A dozen inmates surrounded his bed, fiendishly tying him with stout ropes. In horror, he felt them lift him from the bed and carry him from the building. Quietly they moved across the cobblestone courtyard, in the shadows past the other buildings. They reached their destination, the carpentry shop. As he was carried inside, he sensed a multitude of people, and he craned his neck this way and that, the better to see. In the dim light, his eyes fell upon an open coffin. A sound gurgled in his throat. He tried to get free. He squirmed and twisted, but was lifted and then placed in the coffin. His body gave an involuntary shudder of revulsion, and tears rolled freely from his eyes. He heard the shuffling of many feet, the whisper of cloth rustling against cloth, and the soft sobs of sorrow. Was this a game? What were they going to do to him? Suddenly, from all sides, the mourners loomed into view. In his mind's eye, visions of the funeral he had witnessed only a few hours ago flashed by. He trembled at the thought of it. The coffin lid descended. In the ebony blackness, he cried out silently in terror. Would they let him suffocate? He listened and heard wails of protest. What was wrong? He heard the inmates conversing in low tones. Then suddenly, the lid was removed. Were they going to free him? Surely they could only be playing a game. There was an expectant quiet, broken only by the sound of sawing wood. A face suddenly leered into the coffin and just as suddenly disappeared. And then the coffin lid was overhead. They were putting it back on. The oohs and ahs that followed were all appreciative, and no wonder. The lid now had a window through which he could receive air. Or was it put there so the inmates could see him better? He didn't know. Faces appeared from all angles. Happy faces, sad faces, curious faces, worried faces. Different faces, different expressions, yet each one the same as all the others. A hand reached through the opening and felt of his cheek. Hartley Quim closed his eyes, but even then he heard people brushing against the outside of the coffin, sensed their horrid heads framed in the opening. A hand pinched his nose. He had lost all track of time. He lay there, motionless, while the mourning inmates slowly filed by, paying their last respects. Each time he opened his eyes, a different face was peering into his. He tried to pray, but he couldn't remember the words. Finally, he felt the coffin being lifted. Would they return him to his room now? They hadn't really tried to hurt him. They were merely playing. Little children, that was all. The ceiling was much closer now. Obviously, the coffin was being carried on their shoulders. The ceiling moved by above him, and soon he was passed through the doorway into the night. Save for a few clouds, the sky was clear, stars twinkled brightly, unconcerned with the eerie pageant that was taking place below them. He listened to the shuffling steps of the procession on the cobblestones. They were just little children, just playing a game. They were probably bringing him back to his room. He saw the top of a yard building pass slowly by above him. Wasn't that his building? He had disappeared from view. Again, there was nothing but the star-filled sky above him. That couldn't have been the building where his room was. He looked again at the sky. Clouds were forming. Starlight, star bright. He couldn't remember the rest. A tree passed by overhead, its leaves whispering in the wind, its branches waving goodbye as it passed from his sight. Where were they taking him? He had lost all sense of direction. They were just children, just little children who had killed his predecessor. They passed beneath a wrought iron archway, a gate. Against the darkening sky, he tried to spell the letters he saw. He had to read them backwards. C-E-M. Hartley Quim's heart pounded till he thought it would burst through his chest. Were they really serious? Had they forgotten he wasn't a real corpse? They wouldn't bury him alive, would they? He felt himself being lowered to the ground. A moment later he heard the unmistakable sound of shovels digging into the rain-soaked earth. The realizations undermined his last vestiges of self-control, and he fainted. Hartley Quim opened his eyes and sat up in bed. Drops of rain from a leak in the skylight hit his face. He untangled his legs from the mass of twisted sheets, pulled the choking bedclothes from his mouth, and heaved a sigh. He wiped the perspiration from his head and gave fervent thanks that it had only been a horrible nightmare. He lay back on the pillow, relaxed. Hartley Quim smiled softly, every fiber of his being tingling with relief. He looked up through the skylight at the winking stars, and imagined them to be relieved for him too. He recited the poem, Starlight, Star Bright, and this time he knew all the words. He closed his eyes momentarily and made a wish. And when he opened his eyes again, a face was grinning down at him. Startled, Hartley Quim tried to leap up, but found he could not move. He tried to yell, to scream, but couldn't. The face disappeared. And then a shovelful of dirt hit him flush in the face. And that a dirty shame. Well, just in case some of you characters are a wee bit confused, here's the lowdown. Hartley was in the coffin all the time. He only dreamed he woke up in his room. Well, actually, inmates, when he fainted for a few moments, he subconsciously dreamed that, wait a minute. When he was in, no, he dreamed when he was awake. No, that's not, oh, the devil with it.